Game theory has been around since 2011, which was over 13 years ago at this point. Obviously, with Matpat retiring this upcoming March, we are coming up on the end of an era for YouTube. Theorizing about whatever has been a big part of the YouTube scene for a long time now, and it's not going to stop the second Matpat posts his final theory episode on March 9th. The theorist community could be argued that it is actually at its strongest now with Matpat himself being one of the biggest talking points on YouTube. And like Matpat said in his announcement video, theorizing has been for a long time a big part of YouTube content. But how important is theorizing? Not only when it comes to games, but with films and TV shows and food of all things. Why is theorizing, more specifically in media, important? Well, let's start with our main character of this whole topic, Matthew Patrick. While being the face of the theorist brand, Matpat has almost always been the face of theorizing online in general. But going back to the roots of the theorist business, Matpat started game theory as not only a way to express his passion for gaming, but also as proof that he can make something successful that he could show off at job interviews, which I still find pretty funny. It didn't take a super long time for the Game Theorist channel to gain success. In a time where online careers often lasted around 2 to 3 years before losing traction, Matpat with his 3 million subscribers in 2014 decided that if game theory was going to fall off sooner than later, one of the best ways to continue his career online was to start another theorist channel and expand his reach from gaming to films. And so film theory was born, and to great success. It might have even helped keeping the theorist brand at the top of their game. This video is not a deep dive into every detail of Matpat's YouTube career, so I'll jump ahead to just over a year ago when game theory dropped to this video. The main discussion that this video brought to the table was something in the backs of a lot of the minds of gamers, and more specifically theorists. Theorizing has obviously been around for a long time, but in recent years it has become one of the bigger topics when it comes to stuff like gaming and films. Discussing stuff like future plots of shows you enjoy with other fans, trying to predict the next place that your favorite game story is going to go. It's all super important to the structure of a game's fan base. The developers or creators of these games and films know this very well. But once again, we are brought to the question of why. Well, let's go back to Five Nights at Freddy's. The original game blew up for multiple reasons. The main one people think of is the obvious horror aspects. The game introduced a new expression of horror in games which has now been replicated beyond belief. The sit and survive aspects for this first installment is what tortures the player and leaves a lasting memory in the player's head. But not only was this first game shattering from a horror gameplay perspective, but the hidden lore beneath the surface level was also a big part of what made the franchise in the beginning stages, and is now the leading factor for why the series is still around. Originally, there wasn't that much lore that the fans could dig into, but with so little given, it kept the players intrigued. They were left to theorize since it was not yet confirmed that a sequel would be releasing later that same year. And with one channel already known for theorizing about games, fans of Five Nights at Freddy's would start requesting a theory all over the place, in the comments of Matpat's other theories, in the replies of his other social media accounts, and callouts for people asking Matpat to give his praised thoughts on this new indie horror hit. And once the second installment of FNAF was teased in September of 2014, Matpat put out this infamous poll on his Twitter on what the fans wanted for his annual Halloween episode. The options: Slenderman, a well-known game and story that game theory hadn't yet covered, or this new game called Five Nights at Freddy's. I bet you can guess which one the fans chose. After the poll closed, Matt's first of a multitude of theories on FNAF was published that Halloween. If we were to look back at this first theory, it's quite obvious that Matt was dead wrong. But it also proves how little information we had from this first installment. We have to remember that Scott Cawthon made FNAF as a last-ditch effort as a game developer. He had obviously not planned out for this game to be as big of a success as it had been. So whatever little secrets he had thrown in didn't have an insane amount of thought put into them. So Matpat putting together the theory that he did was honestly quite impressive given the circumstances. After the success of his first theory, the focus of Matpat's time slowly became Five Nights at Freddy's. And as more games released, more theories rose and more theorists joined the mob of lore hunters searching for answers. Theories and the lore of FNAF quickly became more of a focus for the franchise than just the gameplay. Books started getting released, games became more lore-heavy with less pure horror than the original game blew up because of. A chunk of the original fans of the games might say this was a bad route for the franchise to take, but most people would have realized that having an intriguing story is just as important as having an interesting game or interesting visuals. This is how we have come to where we are today, with theorists in every corner of the internet. Keeping people engaged with little details about a story that they are obviously interested in is how you manage to keep a fanbase going for as long as something like Game of Thrones or FNAF or the MCU. Basically, all forms of media that have survived a long period of time, or even new stories like the ones being told in Poppy Playtime, have been able to lead on their fan base to make these ideations of their story. But not only are theories how you keep something going, but they could also be a jumpstart to the growth of something new. Like Matpat stated in his video on whether theories are killing games or not, almost all developers nowadays, and even a large chunk of content creators and the people playing these games or watching these shows, are realizing that some of these pieces of media are what the internet calls theory bait. Theory bait is essentially when something is made with the intention that it will gather the attention of theorists. Say you make a mascot horror game set in an abandoned mall and the distinct mascot is still alive and chasing the player as he collects, say, 8 notebook pages, just a random number. You sprinkle in some little dialogue here and there that has no attachments to anything you would see by playing the game normally. However, a theorist would pick up on this and immediately sense a hidden story. Bam, you've got the attention of the theorist community, and who knows, maybe if your story is well crafted enough and the secrets are hidden in unique ways, you might get a coverage from Matpat himself or one of the other big theory channels on YouTube. But that's just the thing. When you have someone like Matpat of Game Theory, a channel with almost 19 million subscribers and an average amount of 2 to 4 million views per video, if you were to get a coverage of your game, that could make an entire career, not even exaggerating. Smaller developers who have gotten theories done on their games were able to use their newfound fame to start a game dev career and actually find success. A great example of this that people seem to be talking a bit more about right now is the rise of Baldis Basics. If you don't know the story about how Baldis Basics became what it is, I'm gonna link a great retrospective by Manaxa of the whole story in the description. I highly recommend you check it out after this video, but I'm still gonna do a smaller sum up of the game and how it came to be. Baldis Basics was originally created for a game jam that was themed on games within games. Baldi was created in 2-ish weeks and did not end up winning the game jam, but did get major attention from gamers. Long story short, a small game jam experiment turned into a huge series that got caught up in its lore and eventually just faded with time. This is also a big reason that Matpat was so worried about theorizing. I'm not the first person to discover that getting a theory done on your game or short film or whatever can come with a lot of fame. So some developers are now leaning farther into making games full of theory bait and clickable and interesting characters in order to get the highest probability of getting the godsend that is a Matpat coverage. But with that as the main goal in mind, you get distracted and lose focus on what your project was originally meant to be. So often the project turns out to be buggy and a mess, or missed cuts in a bunch of scenes or whatever. The project loses its stance as a project and could even fully lose its purpose. This isn't just a problem when it comes to smaller indie devs either. This happens with some already widespread and well-known creators. One of the internet's favorite examples is TinyBuild, who created Hello Neighbor and their infamous lineup of tweets basically begging Matpat to do a theory breakdown on the pilot episode of their Hello Neighbor TV show, telling him he would enjoy dissecting it frame by frame. The sad thing when it comes to Hello Neighbor is that it was genuinely quite fun and a good game when the first few alphas released. Sure, it did have some quirks and teases at possible lore and an underlying story which did manage to squeeze out a few theories from Matpat, but you could tell the game was being developed out of a passion for gaming. New alpha versions were being released super often, and you wouldn't be working so hard on something if you were only craving that next game theory. But then, I could only assume that TinyBuild saw the attention that theories were getting online and realized how big of an opportunity it would be to dive more into the lore side of their game than the actual game side. So that's what they did. They started releasing books, TV show pilots, more merchandise. But while all this was happening, the development of each new version of the game actually started to slow down. Updates started becoming far and few between, and people were honestly starting to lose interest. Then, the full game finally released, and it was a completely buggy mess. Some might say it was worse than Security Breach on launch. There are so many glitches that it made the game basically unplayable, and the story felt so dry and as if there wasn't really any lore to be found. It felt like just a big cash grab and a ginormous letdown for big fans of the franchise. I know, I'm being a bit contradictory right now. Theorizing is what keeps games alive, but people start chasing theories and it takes away from the value of the project. But the more you think about it, the more that you can see that there is an actual solution to this theory, if you will. Even though Matpat is retiring, the Theorist brand won't stop with him, and theorizing in general won't either. So we can't really stop those theory-hungry developers and creators to make projects with the sole idea of blowing up and becoming the next FNAF or Poppy Playtime. But what we can do is to start more often recognizing these flaws when we see projects that are less polished than we know that they can be. Now, I'm not saying that harassing developers on social media and calling their game trash because you believe it wasn't made out of passion is what we need to start doing at all. What I'm saying is that when we see actually incredible projects being created with an interesting story, we need to bring those more attention. Make your own game theory video and talk about it with friends or online. Maybe we even get a large content creator or theorizer to look at the game and talk about it. When we see new stuff like the Mandela Catalog or Local 58, we need to support these projects and show other creators that these types of projects are what we truly want and will talk about. Nobody wants a broken mess of a game or a sloppily put together film, and we need to preface this. Theorizing not only brings people together, but it is also an inspiration for bigger and better projects in the future. So even though Matpat will be leaving us this upcoming March, theorizing will live on.